I'm Matt from Hellions, and I'm going to take you through some of the lyrical inspirations behind me. Okay, Blueberry Odyssey. So this one's from a 2006 book called The Conspiracy Against the Human Race by an American author called Thomas Ligotti. It's essentially a discourse on philosophical pessimism, which is a reoccurring theme throughout Rue. But primarily on this track, we delve into that bit. Mr. Ligotti suffers from a chronic anxiety and is quite reclusive. He's known to be sort of hide away and be non-communicative with the press. You can sort of feel that in most of his works, that anxiety of his, it sort of pushes through you, and that's sort of the, I don't know, it puts like a terror in you or something like that. But this is his only work of non-fiction, and it's, I guess, what he believes it discusses his belief of our purposelessness as a species. And I think that there is a liberation to be found in acknowledging that perhaps we are just an inordinately evolved race. And the suffering and mental ailments that we have are a direct result of consciousness being too high, something that we don't share with plants or animals, for example. It's like they have a basic consciousness where they will not suffer any of the things that we tend to on a daily basis. And it stripped me of some of the unnecessary ego that a lot of us have lurking around in the sense of maybe being special in one way or another. X. So this is an excerpt from a novel called Steppenwolf by a Swiss-German author by the name of Hermann Hesse. He's probably my favorite author, and this might be my favorite novel. This one the English translation came out in 1929, and the German edition was done in 1927. It's a romantic story of a middle-aged man torn between the high and low roads of life that essentially constitute life and death, respectively. And I always felt a strong sort of kinship toward that theme. All of his books feel like a rite of passage to me, each of them dealing with the pursuit of purpose and sustaining happiness, which are pretty much, I suppose, the only really important things to discuss. His words have always had a profound effect upon the Hellions writing, and from Indian Summer, I think Mea Culpa, most directly. I think there were some lines that I'd taken, most directly from him that are in that. Yeah, I think I'll always return to his books because they're so unique in style and wide in scope, like in an existential sort of format. The excerpt from the novel that I'd chosen to represent the song is the best analogy I've encountered that does justice to that feeling of precariousness that comes with being in a low place. And I think it's astounding how on a separate note, I think it's astounding how the words of this song have been perceived, because when I was writing them, it's probably in the lowest place that I've been in, and it might be Hellions' darkest song to date, but I think the conviviality, like the way that the music feels, like it feels a bit happy and bouncy and effervescent. And I think that sort of twisted the words around in people's minds to make it feel like an anthem of positivity. And when people have come to us saying that it's helped them through things and they've seen a lot of light in that, and I think I much prefer that than the way it was originally intended, which was kind of like sort of a thing about giving up. So it's sort of the song's been turned around for me. Smile. So this quote I stumbled across it online one day, reading about the effects of incessant social media use on the mind, what it means for our generation in particular, because we seem to be the worst with it. It was by a woman named Aisha Taram, I think I'm saying that right, and it was for a Golf Today newspaper article. She goes on to say the need for privacy is essential to the growth process of a human being, and somehow our obsession for sharing has blinded us to the most human of behaviors. And although social media use is only a part of the message, in Smile, this article in particular, had really hit home with me. It helped me to get my head around what I was trying to say with it, and the music video ended up focusing on that part of the message as well. I do think that our desperation for validity manifests itself primarily in the use of social media, or just on the internet in general. A lot of us say a lot of stupid shit merely for the sake of saying something, and the gratification that follows that is as habit forming as anything else that feels good but comes at the expense of your mental health. Almost analogous to alcohol or something like that. I think it can be, anyway. constant comparison and constant need for validation isn't something that should be instilled in a person when they're still a child and haven't fully developed yet. I think that takes a long time for you to figure out who you are before you're comparing yourself to everything around you, and it gets a lot of unnecessary neurosis sort of coming in your head as a young person. All right, follow. The quote for this one came from Mary Shelley's famous story, Frankenstein. I never really had an interest in reading this book as a young person because of the way that he was stereotyped as like the hulking green dude with a weird like flat top bowl cut haircut thing, and like the bolts coming out his neck, and he's really sort of mentally vacant or whatever, like drooling and carrying on. But I couldn't have anticipated the depth of allegory in this story, and the way that Mary had created a completely sentient and articulate monster capable of elucidating the existential pain that comes with loneliness was incredible to read, and it's not something that you'd ever think would be there if you just go by that stereotype that's in the films and in general media. The dialogue between the Frankenstein monster and Frankenstein himself midway through the book is as good as anything I've ever read, and it's really stuck with me. Particularly that dialogue with the quote there was wonderful, and I do recommend that to anybody that's not read it, because it's not, I dare say it's not as you would perceive it to be. Safari, the song itself, deals with the realization of romantic incompatibility and as an extension of that, a general sense of opposition or even antipathy for the rest of the world around you, because it sort of starts as a seed with another person, and then that can extend and tend to shape the rest of the world. Like the feeling is that powerful that it can change everything else around you, with that as just the root. Rue. So this one comes from Viktor E. Frankl's 1946 book, Man's Search for Meaning, and I think it's his most well-known work. He's an Austrian neurologist and Holocaust survivor, and in this story is perhaps the most inspiring story of perseverance through devastation that I've ever heard. I can imagine few things more detrimental to the human mind as being dragged from one concentration camp to the next while watching all your friends and all the people around you being tortured and suffering until eventually they're killed. So yeah, that was an incredibly powerful read for me. And I read this book around the time of the Orlando shooting, in which this song is a direct reaction to. And if I can digress for a minute, I'd like to explain that the song began as just a sweet ditty, like I was just at home with an acoustic guitar having a drink, and those chords and that melody had come to my head, and it was just in all honesty, I'm lost in reverie, you and I are 17 were the first words that had come to my head, and it felt so sweet with that melody, and so I was just rolling with it, and it all felt really good, which is usually that's instrumental to a song. It's just how it feels on a intuitive level. So I was rolling with it, and it felt really good. And I'd gone downstairs to get something to eat, to take a break, and I turned on the news, and that's when the coverage of the Orlando shooting was on the television everywhere. And that had changed my mood, obviously, quite dramatically, because of being the tragedy that it is. And I wanted to document that shift in my mood from that sort of saccharine, sweet, effervescent mood into this one of anger and compassion. And so going to the rest of the song with and then slowly our loathing will interfere. So you might have noticed there's a direct sort of change, like a pivot in that. And I wanted that to be a sort of a reflection of how when you grow older, it's like these horrible things that happen can sort of cast a shadow over the innocence of youth, and you start to you can develop according to that. But the quote felt pertinent to the recurring pattern in human history, and very pointedly at the gun laws in the States. Theater of the Lotus. So this one is by Arthur Schopenhauer, who is another one of philosophical pessimism's ardent subscribers. Some of the ideas some of his ideas paved the way for some of the world's greatest thinkers, like Nietzsche and Freud and Tolstoy, among others, and the aforementioned Mr. Ligotti, who had gone a long way in inspiring Blueberry Odyssey. The primary theme here, carried over from Lotus Eater, is the learning to live with the veil of anxiety and like the perceived false hostility that you can sort of feel coming from the world and the shape that the world takes, although that might not necessarily be the case. It just feels that way. It can dull even the brightest moments of your life, which is a shame. And we've personified that feeling in the form of Luna's ringmaster, who opens the track. And if you were to have met Luna, her real name's Beth, you'd be astounded as to how such an aggressive and commanding voice can come out of somebody so sweet and small. I do recommend that you check out her shit, by the way. She's very good. I think that Schopenhauer meant by this quote, what he meant is that many of, or most of us sort of shine ourselves up or douse ourselves in dirt in order to better suit a social situation or to appear a certain way, more attractive to other people. For me, the quote applies to the track because I think that social anxiety in particular forces a mask onto a person, because the vulnerability of not having something to hide behind is too much to bear, and it's you can't really do without that. Alcohol is a more commonly used mask, and I know for me personally it is, and a lot of people that I know. Yeah, so that's what that one means to me. Get up. This quote was taken from Scottish author Robert Louis Stevenson's 1886 novella, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I was reading this one while listening to the audiobook simultaneously, so it really hammered it into my mind, and it really stuck with me that way. It's another one that everybody's heard of, and it's famous for a good reason, but a lot of people my age haven't visited it, and I do recommend doing that. It's a phenomenal story. As I'm sure you've noticed by this point, I made a point of going back to all of those older novels and really digesting them, because there's a lot of themes of purpose and belonging in those novels that you don't find as commonly with books these days. And I mean, they're all that famous for a reason, so I'd have just wanted to make sure that I had completely gotten all that in. I think this quote might be most representative of the record as a whole. We actually had a number of people read this out at the studio when we were in Thailand. During the first trip for this record, we had because there are a number of Thai people, British, Aussie, Welsh, Scottish, American people there, male and female voices, and we had them all read out an excerpt from this novel. It sort of blended all the voices together, and it was an exercise in showing that I guess the point that we were trying to get across is that we're all so multifaceted, and we all go through these things where we feel as though there's many different versions of ourselves living within the one shell there. Harsh Light. So this quote's by a woman named Anais Nin. She's a French lady. I discovered her through her thorough documentation of Henry and June Miller's marriage and through her own dalliance with Henry Miller. So Henry Miller is an American author, probably best known for his stream of consciousness works in the early 1900s, like Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn, and yeah, there's numerous other ones at that stage that he was well renowned for. And it was through my admiration of his books and wanting to know more about him as a man that I'd stumbled into Anais Nin. Regarding the quote, there had been numerous times in my life where I'd seen a situation or an environment as more so as a reflection of myself, or more accurately as a reflection of my most recent failures or successes, than for what it really is, because you're so heavily invested in what's going on with you that the world around you begins to take that shape on. And yeah, you don't really see things or people even for who or what they really are, because it's a very human sort of self-absorption, I think. And She had used this statement in her 1961 work, Seduction of the Minotaur, which I have not read that, but I think I'd first heard it in a biographical Henry Miller podcast or something like that. I think this quote is true for many people in a very general way, but within the context of this song, it's sort of heightened and blurred because it's sort of about a bender gone wrong or an acid trip. The world took on a very hostile shape. All right, 26. So I had to squeeze another Hermann Hesse one in here. I thought this quote in particular is probably most representative of the 20s series in general. It's from his 1910 novel called Gertrude, which is more centered around music and the arts than his other works. And I do recommend that if you have the patience for something as thick as what those old works tend to be. What I mean is that it's quite verbose and otherworldly, the language. The English language has changed a lot over 100 years. Each of the songs in the 20 series are a documentation of the changes that have occurred within myself, growing older, year by year, and of the other boys as well. We all, particularly with this one, the boys were really contributive and had a lot to say. Yeah, so each of the songs in the 20 series pertain to purpose and peace and belonging, and we insist that each of these ones remain optimistic above anything else. I think it's the perfect way, or the most appropriate way, to close an album after all the things that we push in there, and a lot of them are negative, and we drag the listener through a lot of thematic dirt and some deep existential stuff that perhaps might be seen as a bit unpleasant. So I think it's necessary for us to end on a high and remind them that at the end of the day everything's all right. Being or even just feeling understood is integral to maintaining a healthy state of mind, I think, and for my whole adult life, music has been the center of my universe. So for me to find people that whose natures harmonize well with my own, it helps for me if they have a natural affinity for music. And in order, and as an extension of that, for me to be truly understood, I need for people to understand my art and my creations, and I think that's very true to any musician or artist in general.